Well, happy Father's Day to all the fathers here. But I also want to mention about Juneteenth, which is tomorrow. It didn't fall on a Sunday this year, but if you're like me, when I first moved to Texas, I'd never heard of Juneteenth. And I'm so glad now that it's a national holiday and we can all celebrate it together. But for those of you who don't know, during the Civil War in September of 1862, Abraham Lincoln did a preliminary emancipation proclamation where he declared all slaves free as of January 1st, 1863. January 1st, 1863 comes and goes, and nothing changes because we're still in the midst of a civil war. And so the slaves were still not free. Fast forward to April of 1865, and the war ends, and finally slaves are, again, not only declared free, but now the war's over, but nobody told the slaves in Texas. They hadn't heard. And it wasn't until June 19th, 1865, that Major General Gordon Granger came to Galveston, he came to Houston, and he read a proclamation that told the slaves that they were free, that finally communicated to those who had not heard it in Texas, and things finally changed. So that's what we celebrate tomorrow, and we should all celebrate that tomorrow. Now, 2,000 years ago, Jesus walked into a synagogue, and he opened the scroll from Isaiah, and he read from it where it says, I proclaim freedom, liberty to the captives, to the slaves. And he told them, he said, today, I declare this in your hearing, that this is fulfilled. In other words, Jesus said 2,000 years ago, he declared that we could be free from slavery. Slavery to sin, slavery to ourselves, slavery to selfishness. But we hadn't all heard it, right? And I know when I became a Christian, one of the first things I thought was, why didn't somebody tell me about this before, right? If you've become a Christian, you've had the same experience. This was out there. The declaration has already been made, but nobody had told us. So tomorrow, when we celebrate Juneteenth, and we all should celebrate Juneteenth regardless of race, as Christians, let's remember too that there are people who haven't heard. Even though the declaration, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the Spirit has been made, people still need to hear. For those of you who are our first-time guests, I want to welcome you. My name is Scott Fiddler. I am not the pastor. Thank God. It's not my gifting. In fact, when I was left running this church for a while, 13 years ago, somebody named me Pastor Spock because I was not particularly empathetic. Wasn't cut out for it. So if you're a guest today, we want to welcome you, and I'll tell you, you're getting the second string today. Our pastor is on sabbatical, which is great because when he first came here, he preached like 52 weeks in a row. It was like the spiritual strongman champion, just amazing. But we finally talked him into taking some time off. So he's in third, fourth week, something like that. He'll be back in a few weeks. Now, one of the things I've been accused of being is too practical sometimes. And so I want to stay in that vein though, because that's kind of who I am. And so today we're going to be talking about some kind of sharp business practices and some people get taken advantage of. And so I thought it might be a good idea for me to share with you some ways to guard against that in your own life. And one of the ways you can do that is by reading reviews about products, right? I mean, you go on Amazon, you just don't want to order something, but if you can read the reviews, you can really gain some good information. So I thought it might be helpful if I read a couple reviews for you and show you how you can use these to protect yourself. So we'll start with this one right here. This is the Accoutrements Horsehead Mask. G, you have one of these?
I'm collecting.
Okay. I thought G had one. But you can see like the first review, this is a 5-star review, so this is really good. This means this is a product that you could probably be safe in buying. And he says, this is by John Neal, he says, saved my life. He says, when I turned state's witness, they didn't have enough money to put me in the witness protection program. So they bought me this mask and gave me a list of suggested places to move. Since then, I've lived my life in peace and safety, knowing that my old identity is forever obscured by this life-saving item. So, if you ever decide to turn state's witness, this is the product. I mean, it's 5 stars. Now, there are other uses for this as well, and this is why you read the review, see how useful a product is. This one is entitled, again, 5 stars, My Transformation is Complete. He says, it's day 87, and the horses have accepted me as one of their own. I've grown to understand and respect their gentle ways. Now I question everything I thought I knew. Okay, so there's that. Now let's go to this next product. Now I haven't bought any radioactive material on Amazon in a while, but this is uranium ore in a can. And you can see, now this is 3 stars, so this means, there might be a problem, but it's good because the title, he says, great product but poor packaging, okay? And here's what he says. He says, I purchased this product 4.47 billion years ago, and when I opened it today, it was half empty. Okay, now those of you who didn't get that, you didn't pay enough attention in high school science class. I know Paul got it. Okay, the half-life of uranium is 4.45 billion years. Okay, now lastly, this is a very practical product, and you might find it very helpful, but it's only got 1 star. And so whenever you see 1 star on Amazon, this means you probably should stay away from this item. And this one is UFO detector. It says, can interface with a microcontroller for 24 hours, 7 days a week, monitoring for magnetic anomalies that have been reported with many UFO sightings. And so this reviewer says, I don't know if this is a scam or if mine was broken, but it doesn't work and I'm still getting abducted by UFOs on a regular basis. So, if you have an issue with getting abducted by aliens, you probably want to steer clear of this product. Try a different one. So if you are new with us, you may not know that we have been studying the book of Genesis. Now, we started this last summer. We got about halfway through. Genesis is a very, very long book. And we picked it up again this summer, and today we're in Genesis chapter 29. And like Eric Stevens said last week, when you read the Old Testament, when you read books like Genesis, you're not really looking, it's good to know you're not really looking for characters to model your life after. Okay, this is not really a character study. In fact, I remember when I first became a Christian, and then after that, I was discipled by somebody in college, and he was really teaching me about the Bible. One of the first things he told me is that the Old Testament was drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And it's true. It's true that it is. It's every kind of wrong thinking and wrong actions and all of that. And the good news, though, is even though we don't build our lives on modeling their character, what you can see is God move in space and time. In other words, you can see him move in history. You can see his purposes stated. When Moses is writing, he'll tell you about why God's doing what he's doing. We can see how God reacts to certain situations, what he likes and what he doesn't like. We can see how he responds to people. I like looking at it like, it's like a director's cut in movies. Y'all ever get a director's cut of a movie like on Netflix or on Apple TV? And so the director talks over the film. And so he says, here's why I did this, here's why I did that, here's what I was trying to convey here. When you read the Old Testament, that's what it's like, because Moses is telling us, inspired by God as he writes this, here's what's going on, here's what the Lord is doing in this situation. Now, I don't know about you, but I want to please God. But in order to please God, I need to know what pleases God. And so by reading the Old Testament, you can see these things. I want to understand how he works in people's lives. I want to understand how he works in history. I want to understand what I need to do in order to be in his will. And maybe you feel the same way. Maybe you don't want to think of God as some impersonal force, which is popular today. But you want to know Jesus. You want to have a relationship with God almost like you have a relationship with a friend. And that's proper, because relationships presuppose personality. And what I mean by that is you can't have a relationship with a rock. Now, y'all probably, some of us remember the pet rock phase. It was like the 1980s or something. You younger people, you're like, what are you talking about? Well, there was actually, people were selling rocks, pet rocks, which was absurd. But they were very popular. But you can't have a relationship with a rock because a rock doesn't have a personality. But there are things that God likes. There are things he doesn't like. He acts a certain way. He has personhood in that sense. And so by understanding God, you can have a relationship with him. So with under that understanding, let's go ahead and jump into Genesis chapter 29. And let me give you a little bit of backstory. So what's going on here is Jacob is on a journey to find a wife. So Isaac has sent him, his father has sent him to go back to Haran, which is where Abraham, who is Jacob's grandfather, was originally from. And it's like 400 or 500 miles west of Canaan, which is where they're currently living. He goes, go back and find a wife from among the daughters of Laban. Now, Laban was the brother of Rebekah, who is Jacob's mother, Isaac's wife. And so he goes, heads toward Haran to try to find a wife from amongst the daughters of Laban. And here's what he knows when he goes. Here's what he has to know is, and if you're familiar with what happened before this, you know that the way Isaac had found his wife was because Abraham had sent his servants to go trying to find a wife from his former country, and he says, go back to Haran and find a wife there for Isaac. And so Isaac's servants go, and when they come to this well, they come to a well in the area. Maybe it's the same well. We don't know that, but maybe it's the same well. And as they approach the well, one of the servants says, Lord, if this is your will, help us to find out who the daughter is that Isaac is supposed to marry. And here's how we're going to know who it is. Have her say this, this, and this to me when she comes to the well. So he kind of lays out a fleece, so to speak. And sure enough, when he comes to the well, one of Laban's sister, at that point, Rebekah, comes to the well, and she says exactly what he said, for her, that she would need to say in order for him to know that it was the Lord. So it's like a, divine appointment. The Lord moves. And so you got to know that when Jacob is going back to Haran, he knows this. This has got to be in his mind. He's probably heard his parents tell that story before about how I met your mother, And he's like, yeah, Dad, I've heard it. But it's got to be like foremost in his mind. And so when he approaches, he comes to this well, and he gets to the well, and he sees some herds there of sheep, 3 different herds, and he sees some shepherds there. And he says, where are you all from? And they say, we're from Haran, this area where Laban's supposed to live. So Jacob says, well, do you know Laban? And they go, oh, yeah, we know him. He goes, well, how's he doing? They said, well, he's doing great. He's doing great. And in fact, here comes his daughter, Rachel. And sure enough, Rachel is walking toward the well. And so we'll pick it up in verses 10 and 11. It says that when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the mouth of the well and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Now they were waiting for everybody to get there so they could all move this stone. But I think he's so excited about seeing Rachel that he just goes and does it himself. And in fact, it says in the next verse, it says, then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted his voice and wept. Now the kiss is not a romantic kiss. It's probably cultural, like how you greet a friend, maybe a kiss on the cheek, whatever. But look, the lifting up his voice and crying is emotional. And I think the reason he's so emotional is I think what's happened is he's got this whole story in his mind. He's heard from his parents forever. He walks up to the well, and he's there to get one of Laban's daughters for his wife, and here she comes up to the well. And he's thinking, this is just like it happened with my mother. This has to be the Lord. And then we know, from when we read on a little bit later, that the Bible says that Rachel was beautiful in both face and form, meaning not only did she have a beautiful face, but she had a great figure. I mean, just to be real. I told you this was drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And so he's so excited. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, this has got to be the Lord. Now, there's no indication here that he ever prays and says, Lord, is this your will? He didn't do what happened with his mother. The servants did when they were trying to make sure it was the Lord, but he does probably what a lot of us have done. I've done it before. You see something you want, you start thinking, oh, the circumstances are aligning. This must be the Lord because this happened, and you're imposing your will on God. Now, I don't know this for a fact, and the Bible doesn't really tell us here whether it was God's will that he marry Rachel, which we're going to see. But I think it's still instructive. God doesn't always move the same way. Just because he moved that way with Rebekah becoming Isaac's wife doesn't mean that because these same situations happened this time that means that Rachel was supposed to be Jacob's wife. So then verse 12, it says, Jacob tells Rachel who he is, and Rachel runs to tell her father Laban. Verse 13, it says, so when Laban heard the news of Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him. A lot of running going on here. It says, and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Then he related to Laban all these things. And, it's hard to tell what all these things mean, but I think all these things are this whole story. He tells Laban, can you believe this is the way it happened? It happened just like it happened with my mother and with Isaac, and I come to the well, and here comes Rachel, and this has to be the Lord. So Laban, who seems to be excited as well, and if you know Laban and you get to know Laban, probably for other reasons, and he's probably thinking, okay, there's going to be some money in this for me. And he says, surely you are my bone and my flesh, and he stayed with him for a month. It says, then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. I want to take a little departure here and just give you a practical point. Just some practical advice here. Don't ever go into business with your relatives, okay? Now, I did this once. My wife, Cindy, worked for me for a while. And, after a while, I could tell it wasn't really going to happen. And so I decided it wasn't really working out. And so I decided that we needed to have a restructuring and a reorganization. And so I came to her and I said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I'm going to need to lay you off. And she said, what? And I said, yeah, you're being downsized, sacked, dehired, And she said, why? And I said, well, because you talked back to me at work. You talked back to me at work. I said, Andy Reid and Aisha Darwish, who work for her, they don't ever talk back to me at work, So anyway, and whether that's good marital advice, that's a different story. But again, we're talking about practical business advice here today. So verses 16 and 17, it says, now Laban had 2 daughters, and the name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful of form and face. So just what we talked about a few minutes ago. But the fact that it says Leah's eyes were weak doesn't mean that she needed LASIK surgery or she needed, contacts or anything like that. It's probably a Hebrew idiom, and it's just contrasting with how beautiful Rachel is. It's a way of saying, probably a polite way of saying she wasn't very attractive. We don't know for sure, but that's probably what it means. And in the context of everything else we see here, pretty certain that that's probably what it means. And then it says, verse 18 and 19, it says, now Jacob loved Rachel. So he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. And then Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than give her to another man. Stay with me. Now, to understand what's going on here, you need to understand the culture and the custom. So the custom there was that the older daughter was generally the one who was given away in marriage first to the first person who was interested. And Leah was the oldest daughter. But also, they paid what's called a bride's price. We call it a dowry, or it used to be in the old days in the West, they'd call it a dowry. But it's a little bit different than a dowry because the bride's price was something that the groom paid to the bride's father. And the reason for that was because it was compensation for him having raised her, spent all the money and the time pouring his life into a raiser, and also because of the loss of the value of labor, because once she was gone and married off, she could no longer be a shepherdess or do other things that were helping run this family business. So Laban is probably thinking, okay, I'm going to get a lot of money out of this. But he also knows that it should be Leah, not Rachel, that's being given away in marriage. And so the kind of one of the problems here is that Jacob is so anxious and so sure this is what he wants with Rachel, that instead of letting Laban set the price, he just says, I'll serve her for 7 years. I'll serve you for 7 years for her, which I'll tell you as a lawyer is a terrible negotiation strategy. Okay, number one is you don't negotiate when you're desperate, okay? And you always let the other side make the first offer. I mean, you know that kind of frames it, but and here he makes his best offer first 7 years. And of course, Laban, he's a sharp businessman. He goes, he's probably thinking, wow, that's a great offer. And so he takes it, But I want you to think about how Leah must have felt, because Leah knew what the custom was. She knew she was supposed to go first. And Laban, you can tell by his answer when he says, it's probably better that I give her to you than to give her to another man. That's not a knock on Jacob. You can see the wheels turning. He's thinking, I should probably be giving Leah away, not Rachel. But it's probably better that I give Rachel to you than to give her to another man. And he's probably also thinking, and I can probably get a lot of money out of this as well. But you can imagine how Leah must have felt, because she knew she was supposed to go first. And now not only has Jacob decided not to make an offer for her, but now her father is actually going against custom, which must have just magnified the rejection that she felt in this situation. So in the next verse it says, Jacob served Laban for 7 years, and probably for 7 years every day Leah was reminded that Jacob had chosen Rachel over her. And then after 7 years, Jacob comes to Laban and he says, look, I've kept my part of the bargain, give me my wife. And Laban throws a big wedding feast, and we don't know exactly how this next thing happened, but it's one of the most famous events in the Bible. Some of you know it or are already chuckling. But, what you have to do is kind of imagine some of the circumstances. They didn't have electricity back then, so there was no interior lighting, or probably not very good interior lighting. But what happens is probably Laban goes to Leah and says, or tells Jacob, go ahead and go into your tent, and I'll send Rachel in a minute. And then he goes back and talks to Leah and says, look, I'm going to send you in. He won't be able to tell. There's no light in there. He's drunk. He's probably liquored up because, they've been having this wedding feast, And he's not going to notice. And maybe Leah's thinking, if I just have sex with him, maybe it'll be so good that when he wakes up in the morning, he'll realize he made a mistake by choosing Rachel over me. And so they go in on this, and they send Leah in. Jacob doesn't notice. And then we get to verse 25, and here's what it says. It says, so it came about in the morning that, behold, it was Leah, exclamation point. He was shocked, And he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served with you? Why then have you deceived me? But Laban said, it is not the practice of our place to marry off the younger before the firstborn. Well, he should have said that 7 years ago, And I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, if I had this case, I'd be suing millions of shekels, punitive damages, no problem. But the thing is here, there's no mention of Leah, and Leah is probably standing there when Jacob loses it and says, what have you done? You've deceived me. You've left me with her, She must be thinking, oh my gosh. You can imagine how she must have felt rejected. Verse 27 says, complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also for the service. This is Laban. And he's saying, basically, let's finish this week out of this wedding feast, and then I'll let you have Rachel as your wife also, which gets into a whole other issue we're not going to have time to approach today or address. But he says, I'll give you the other also for the service, which you shall serve with me for another 7 years. And Jacob agrees. And so Laban gives Jacob Rachel. And it says, in fact, the Bible says, in verse 30, it says, he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served Laban for another 7 years. Now imagine what Rachel, or what Leah must have been thinking. She must have been thinking, this guy is so against being stuck with me that he's willing to serve for another 7 years. It must have been horrible what she felt. Her whole life, probably she noticed that men noticed Rachel and not her. And now she's stuck in this marriage where she's not loved. And maybe you've been in that situation, not this exact situation obviously, but maybe you felt that kind of rejection before. Maybe your parents got divorced when you were younger and your father left, and you thought, well, if they really loved me, why would they get divorced? And you took it personally. It's understandable why you think that, as a young child. And maybe you've always felt that rejection. Or maybe you've been through multiple relationships, and every time it ends, it's because the other person left. And you're thinking, what's wrong with me? Why don't people love me? What's wrong with me? Or maybe it's something just as simple as, when you were younger, you were always the last person that was chosen, to play on, when you teamed up or play basketball or football or do something else. And the sting of rejection, of feeling like nobody likes you, nobody cares. And it's in this context, where we've read this entire chapter and there's not a mention of God anywhere. Nobody's seeking God, nobody's praying for God. It doesn't say God is doing anything. Bigamy, deceit, all this stuff. And we get to verse 31 and it says, now the Lord saw that Leah was unloved. In the midst of all of this garbage and people living selfishly and deceiving one another, God saw that Leah was unloved. And it doesn't matter where you are today, what you've done, the rejection you felt, how worthless you may feel, the Lord sees. The Lord sees. And he cares. We'll show you how he cares here in just a minute. He says he opened up her womb, but Rachel was barren. He saw that Leah had been repeatedly rejected. And so he opens her womb and she has a child. It says, verse 32, Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. And what's the affliction she's talking about? It's being rejected. It's being unloved, which is an affliction. But what she does is she says, because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. She's taking what God has given her, the gift of life, a child, and she's thinking, now I can leverage that in order to make this man love me. And that we do the same thing. We do the same thing. We use what the Lord gives us, and then we try to leverage it in order to make other people love us, or to become popular, or to achieve something that we think is going to make us feel significant. Even if you're a Christian, we do these things. You get some new clothes, and so you get a picture and you post it on Instagram or Facebook, and then you're constantly going back and seeing how many people check like, how many comments that you can get, seeking that approval. We're just the same. Verse 33, it says, then she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved. Now here she's already had a child, and she was trying to leverage that child for love. And then she says, because the Lord has seen I'm unloved. So even after she's had this first child, Jacob still doesn't love her. She's still not feeling the love from Jacob. And so she says, he has therefore given me this son also. So she named him Simeon. Again, she's still hoping that the stuff that God gives her is going to gain her approval with others. Verse 34. It says, she conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time This time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was named Levi. Do you notice the switch here? Now it's no longer, he's given me a son and Jacob will love me. Now she's lowered her expectations. Maybe he'll just be attached to me. Maybe he'll recognize that I'm part of the family. And that's exactly what we do. You know, you go, you seek affirmation, you seek love, you get disappointed, and finally you just think, I just need to lower my expectations. I guess this is what life is about. It's just the way life is. We do the same thing. Verse 35. But then it says, and she conceived again and bore a son and said, and look what she says this time. She says, this time I will praise the Lord. So finally, this time, she's no longer going to try to leverage what she's been given in order to get horizontal affirmation from others. Instead, she says, this time, I'm going to praise the Lord. I'm going to turn my affections toward God, toward the giver. I'm not going to be consumed anymore with the gift. I'm going to love the giver. And that's the breakthrough. That's the breakthrough that she has. That's the right response. She's no longer dealing with God in a transactional way. She's not taking from the Lord and giving, or taking what the Lord gives and seeking approval from men. But she's turning her heart back to God where it belongs, realizing that it's about the giver and it's not about the gift. I remember when I was, from the time I could walk, it seems like my father would always tell me that when other people asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, I was supposed to say, I want to be an All-American. And for those who don't know what that means, he wanted me to be an All-American basketball player. And so from the time I could walk, I was dribbling a basketball, I was playing, I was the best player on my junior high team, a high school team. I get to college, I got a college scholarship, I'm playing. And basketball, and by this time even I was already a Christian, but basketball was really all I thought about, mostly what I thought about and cared about. And so what happened though is I ended up getting knee problems. And I go to a doctor, and the doctor says, you can keep playing, but if you do, you're going to be limping for the rest of your life. It was tendonitis, it wasn't like an ACL or anything you would think serious, but tendonitis, it's inflammatory, it doesn't go away, it's chronic. He said, but if you stop playing, you might be okay later. So by the grace of God, I had the good sense, probably by the grace of God, to say, no, I quit. But what happened when I quit was I found out how much I had depended on basketball for my identity. It was my calling card. And when God took it away, it was like, I felt like, and this sounds arrogant, this sounds horrible and nasty, but I thought, I'm just like everybody else now. You know? And some of you who've played athletics on a high level, you know the feeling. You know what I'm talking about. It sounds terrible. But that's the way it was. I mean, my teachers treated me specially. When I was on the basketball team, I walked across campus, people who knew who I was. And when God took it away, it was like, okay, this thing that God's given me no longer is going to be a source of affirmation for me. So what do? And fortunately, I turned to the Lord. And I found true significance, the source of true significance, and that was the Lord. You know, you think about these professional athletes willing to hold on so long to careers after they no longer need the money. I mean, what about Tom Brady, the GOAT, the greatest of all time, 7 Super Bowls, and he decides to play another year, even though he knows it's going to cost him his family, and not just a family, he's married to a supermodel. Rachel, hello, right? Does it sound crazy that he's willing to give that up? He knew she would leave, that would be the end of it, and he still says, okay, I'm going to play another year. Why? He's thinking one more Super Bowl. Maybe that's what's going to do it for me. Maybe that's what's going to make me feel significant. But he's looking in the wrong direction. He should be looking up. I love Psalm 73. Whom do I have in heaven but you? And besides you, I desire nothing on earth. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. And as for me, the nearness of my God is my good. That's where I want to be. That's where I always want to be. where God is the strength of my heart. Nothing I desire on earth. And then the things that he gives me, I can enjoy in the proper context, not because I'm trying to suck the life out of them, not because I'm trying to suck the life out of a relationship. And you all think, some of you think, well, if I can just get married, I'll be happy then. And no, you won't. You'll be like two ticks on a dog, just sucking the life out of each other. Right? Because you're trying to get significance out of something that God never intended to give you. Only God can fill that void. Now here's the thing, verse 35b, it says, therefore she named him Judah. And if you go and you read Matthew 1, you'll see the lineage of Jesus. It traces the lineage of Jesus all the way back to the beginning, past Abraham. And what you realize is that the lineage of Jesus came through Leah, not Rachel. And not only did it come through Leah, it came through Judah. Therefore, this time I will praise him. She praises God. And then the Lord allows her to carry the lineage of the Son of God who would change the world forever. When you stop thinking about using God to get what you think you need and just seek him, oftentimes he'll go beyond and do more than you can ever imagine. Let's pray.